Now that we've talked about styles of expressing conflict, the next topic in Chapter 9 is abusive relationships. Now, when we talk about abuse, we talk about psychological abuse, we talk about physical abuse. So your book describes psychologically abusive things as criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Now, if your sweetie criticizes you every now and then, that doesn't necessarily qualify as abuse. But if you think about really good, healthy relationships, they are not characterized by a lot of criticism, all right? You should not be exchanging a lot of criticism with your partner. They shouldn't be criticizing you that much. You shouldn't be criticizing them that much. So criticism, especially if it's taken too far or if it's too big a component of a relationship, yes, it is an aspect of abuse. Contempt is abusive. If you study John Gottman's research, one of the things he has identified as being a really big red flag for a relationship is contempt. Contempt is talking to people in a sarcastic way, a way that belittles them, a way that indicates that you are somehow superior to them. Those are all examples of contempt. So yeah, if you find yourself speaking contemptuously about your sweetheart or to your sweetheart, that actually qualifies as abuse. And if your sweetheart is talking to you contemptuously or about you contemptuously, yeah, that's abusive. Defensiveness, interestingly enough, is an aspect of abuse. And part of the reason for that is because, as we've talked about before, a lot of times people who feel very defensive tend to feel like the best defense is a good offense. And so they lash out because they are feeling defensive. So, somebody who you say something neutral or even complimentary to them, and they twist it as if you were attacking them, that's a form of manipulation, and it can turn into abuse. And then finally, stonewalling. Stonewalling it's basically like ignoring your needs, ignoring the fact that you need to talk about whatever it is. They're just putting up a wall, refusing to acknowledge your thoughts, your feelings, your needs, refusing to engage. So just like we were talking about how ignoring someone is basically withholding that basic confirmation of recognition, recognizing that you exist. And to some extent, it's withholding acknowledgement. They're not acknowledging that you have thoughts and feelings worth paying attention to. So that kind of stonewalling is, of course, very disconfirming and abusive. Now, sometimes physical abuse comes into play, and your book recommends, of course, don't keep the abuse a secret. So if you're in an abusive relationship, the first step towards dealing with a problem is acknowledging that the problem exists. So try to talk to somebody about it. It doesn't have to be a close friend or family member. It could be a hotline, for example. And on my next slide, I actually have a website and a number you can call. Watch for patterns. Researchers have identified a general pattern that abusive relationships tend to go through. It tends to be tensions build, and then there will be a violent incident. And then it's called a honeymoon phase, but that's not actually accurate. I'll get to that in just a second. So it's tensions build, there's an incident, and then there is the quote honeymoon phase, and then tensions begin to build again. So I had a student a while back who actually had been in an abusive relationship for years, for 20 years. She stayed in the relationship in order to protect her children because she was afraid that if she left her husband, he might get custody of the children and then she wouldn't be there to be a buffer to protect them. So she waited until her children were old enough to be on their own before she left her abusive partner. And when we were talking about this in class, she said she really did not like the term honeymoon for that phase because she said once you've been through it a couple times, unless you're a complete idiot, you know this is not a honeymoon. There's nothing romantic about it. He may bring flowers, or the abuser may bring flowers. Abusers can be male or female, obviously, but they'll bring flowers, they might apologize, they might be really, really nice to you, but you know it's going to happen again. So she said she did not really appreciate them calling it a honeymoon phase. She thought it should be called the calm before the storm. Your book also recommends developing strategies for dealing with an abusive situation. Have code words that you can text your friends, for example, or that you can say if you call them. Have emergency numbers handy if you can. Have some kind of strategy. Build that up during the calm before the storm phase so that you have an option if things get bad. And of course, don't blame yourself.